Japan's most powerful earthquake ever triggers a monster tsunami. Fear washes over the nation. But that's just the beginning. 10 nuclear reactors at 2 power plants are crippled, threatening the unimaginable.
If Tokyo needed to be evacuated, I feared the entire nation of Japan would be paralyzed by chaos.
It became darker and darker. A terrifying situation. We were fighting an invisible enemy, out-of-control reactors.
What will it take to save the country from radiation?
Mankind has never faced the forces of physics and the forces of nature that those people faced.
Nuclear meltdown disaster, right now on Nova. This is the road to nowhere. A once thriving place in one of the most prosperous countries on Earth. Japan. Radioactive Japan. Time stood still here on March 11th, 2011. Houses that aren't homes. Schools that are silent. Stores shuttered. Towns without people. Past the checkpoints, the scans, and the meticulous suit-up, layer upon layer upon layer of protection, is the place we simply know as Fukushima. Site of 3 nuclear reactor meltdowns.
This is called the Central Control Room. All of the equipment at the power plant is operated from here.
He is a nuclear plant operator. This is where he has always worked. He used to live nearby, but now he too cannot go home. He and his co-workers are ashamed, scorned by the neighbors they once had.
We've been through so much in this control room. It's hard to put into words.
He was here when it happened. Now he is hoping to make amends by helping clean up the toxic mess.
4 years ago, this room was completely dark. We had only small fluorescent lights and flashlights. We had given up on our own survival. Now, talking to you with the lights on, it seems like a lifetime ago.
This is the story of the Fukushima meltdowns. The infamous events at Fukushima Daiichi, or number 1, told by those who were there and risked everything. And the lesser-known story of its sister plant 7 miles away, Fukushima Daini, or number 2. It faced the same onslaught and challenges. But thanks to a little luck and a Herculean effort, it was saved from ending up like this. March 11th, a bad day for Japan and the world, could have been so much worse. The inevitable came without warning at 2:46 p.m. Two giant pieces of the Earth's crust, tectonic plates, move suddenly and violently. One pushes down, causing the plate above it to spring upward like a catapult along a 300-mile fault line. In a nation all too familiar with earthquakes, it is the largest ever recorded. Magnitude 9. Propagating outward at 9,000 miles an hour, record-breaking seismic waves careen toward land and the 10 nuclear reactors at the 2 Fukushima plants. All of them designed by General Electric, owned and operated by the largest utility in Japan, the Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO. They are there to feed the insatiable energy needs of Tokyo.
Suddenly, I heard the earth rumble like a fierce growl. It was an extremely intense earthquake, but it wasn't only strong, it was also terribly long.
An American nuclear reactor service technician, Carl Pilateri, is there doing some upgrades.
It was just one big hammer. The entire building was moving. Everything was coming down. The lights were crashing everywhere. And it just got worse from there, actually. In 1 nanosecond, just the entire floor went black.
The shaking was like nothing I had experienced. The operators either held on to that bar or crouched down. That's how we endured the earthquake.
I just wondered, how long is this going to continue?
It lasts 6 minutes. Takayuki Inagaki is general manager of the maintenance department for units 1 through 4 at Daiichi. He reports directly to the superintendent, Masao Yoshida. Both men have spent their entire careers at TEPCO. Inagaki worries about his wife and 2 sons.
When the earthquake hit, I think I sent one email to my wife, explaining that I didn't think I'd be able to come home for a while. After I sent it, we lost contact with the outside. We couldn't even make calls.
Seismometers at nuclear plants are designed to trigger an automatic emergency response after an earthquake. Power plant operators routinely drill for this, but it is still a risky, tense event. Called a scram, it is designed to put the brakes on the nuclear chain reaction of sustained fission. A nuclear reactor is fueled by uranium, an element that naturally splits apart, releasing neutrons. But uranium fission can induce more fission. When a loose neutron fires into a nearby uranium nucleus, it becomes unstable and quickly splits. Each time an atom splits, it generates heat. To make fission robust enough to generate power, uranium is enriched, shaped into pellets, and then stacked in long tubes called fuel rods. This ensures lots of uranium atoms are close enough to each other to allow a healthy chain reaction. To manage the rate of the reaction, control rods that absorb neutrons are moved in and out of spaces among the fuel. During a scram, the control rods are pushed all the way in, terminating the chain reaction. By 3:02, operators at Daiichi confirm the 3 reactors that were online have successfully scrammed. And at Fukushima Daini, all 4 reactors running full throttle also automatically shut down safely. Even though the nuclear chain reaction has now abruptly stopped, the uranium fuel rods remain very hot. It's called decay heat.
The nuclear chain reaction was stopped within seconds, but the decay heat continued to be a problem. It takes approximately 20 to 24 hours for the systems to cool the reactor down to less than 212 degrees and achieve what's called cold shutdown.
At its core, a nuclear power plant is not unlike a pressure cooker on a stove. Water is heated to the boiling point, creating steam. And steam under pressure turns turbines, generating electricity. The complexity and cost of nuclear energy is about keeping the radioactive genie in the bottle. So the uranium fuel sits inside rods, underwater, in a steel pressure vessel, surrounded by a concrete and steel containment structure inside a reactor building. All those layers of protection are there in case the water stops flowing. If that happens, it quickly boils away, exposing the fuel, and it melts, turning into radioactive magma. Unchecked, it will melt right through the steel reactor vessel and onto the concrete and steel containment structure that surrounds it. So at the Fukushima plants now, it is critical that the electric water pumps and valves keep running for the reactor core to safely cool down. Power normally comes from the electric grid, and the earthquake has caused a blackout. But there is a plan B. The plant is equipped with diesel-electric generators to provide power in an emergency. They start automatically, as they're designed to do.
If it had only been the earthquake, we wouldn't be here today. The safety systems were doing their thing, the reactor cores were being cooled, and things were going pretty well.
When the seafloor suddenly moves upward during the earthquake, it causes the water near the epicenter to rise with it. The giant swell is the start of a tsunami. Forecasters issue a tsunami warning. They predict 10-foot-high waves in Fukushima Prefecture. The main buildings at Daiichi and Daini are about 30 feet above sea level. So no one worries much about a tsunami. And then at 3:27 p.m., the first of 7 giant waves crashes over the seawall.
Then I saw the tsunami coming. I was on top of that hill, wondering if I was high enough. This thing was, it was huge.
The tallest surge of water is nearly 50 feet high, more than twice the height of the seawall.
I assumed there would be a tsunami, but not one 50 or 55 feet high. I couldn't even imagine a tsunami like that.
Fukushima Daiichi is inundated. 2 workers drowned, trapped in the basement of the number 4 turbine building. Six generators, along with the wiring, switches, and breakers connecting them to the plant, are located in the basements of the turbine buildings for units 1 through 4. The floodwaters destroy them all. 2 additional generators behind Unit 4 are high and dry, but their switching gear is in the basement, ruined by the seawater. The generators would be useless. Meanwhile, 7 miles to the south, at the other Fukushima plant, Daini, or number 2, the crisis is equally dire. The big waves roll in, swamping key motors, wiring, pumps, and generators.
Immediately after the tsunami hit, this room lost power. That's when I realized something very serious had happened.
Naohiro Masuda is the plant superintendent on that fateful day. He began his career here at Daini, reporting for duty in 1982 while it was still being built. He knows it as well as anyone.
This building is 40 feet above sea level. And since there was a power outage here, I imagine most of the buildings near the sea were damaged by the tsunami. From that point on, we knew we were in trouble.
Operators in the control rooms give Masuda very bad news. Units 1, 2, and 4 no longer have any operative cooling systems.
In nuclear power, we say stop, cool, and contain. These are the three most important functions. When I realized that we had lost cooling, I knew the situation was extremely serious.
But what needs to be fixed? And how? He orders a team of about 40 workers to go out and inspect the damage.
There were several hundred aftershocks that day. I really hesitated to give the order to send people out on site.
They arrive in the rooms housing electric motors that run the pumps that draw seawater to cool the reactors.
Cars had been washed right up to the door, and there were huge piles of debris. They said, "How could you have sent us to such a place?"
Today, they have preserved some of the evidence of the flood that wiped out the motors and their wiring.
Electrical supply systems are located in this room. The tsunami came up to here.
Back at Daiichi, reactors 1 through 4 are now in total darkness, and things are quickly spiraling out of control.
We were in the middle of dealing with the accident. Then, all at once, the lamps went out. All sorts of alarms were going off. All of those went out. Basically, a station blackout.
Station blackout, the two most dreaded words in the world of nuclear power generation. At Fukushima Daiichi, reactors 1 and 2 not only lose the alternating current that powers the pumps and valves, but also the direct current, there to keep the instruments working.
It became darker and darker. A terrifying situation. And the operators weren't sure what was happening. We couldn't even tell if there was water in the nuclear reactors.
We were at the starting line of a race, but we didn't know if we need to run 100 yards or if we need to run a marathon.
The oldest reactor at the site is Unit 1. It began operation in 1971 and is equipped with outmoded last resort cooling systems called isolation condensers.
The steam being produced by the hot reactor core was routed into this large tank of water. The water would cool the steam, convert it back into water, and it would drain back into the reactor core to be recycled over and over again.
It is a passive system designed to work on natural circulation without any electrical power at all. So is it working? In the darkened control room, they don't have a clue. What they did not know at the time is when the power fails, the isolation condenser valves are almost completely closed, curtailing the flow of steam and water.
When the isolation condensers failed on Unit 1, the reactor water level just started boiling away because it was no longer being cooled and maintained by the isolation condensers.
If the isolation condensers are working properly, vents on the side of the reactor building would be releasing huge amounts of steam.
There was steam coming out of the discharge of it, but they didn't realize it wasn't sufficient. So they thought they had more time than they did.
Now there is nothing to stop the meltdown. At 3:42 p.m., 15 minutes after the tsunami waves rolled in, TEPCO notifies the national and local governments that there is a special event at the plant. Actually, it is an emergency that has never been envisioned.
It was a situation that hadn't been anticipated. We couldn't use the procedure manuals.
What was happening was beyond what we trained for on a daily basis. Using what little information we had to decide immediately, what can we do? What should we do? It was a race against time.
They desperately need power, but from where? TEPCO dispatches generator trucks, but they are slowed by earthquake and tsunami wreckage. When they finally arrive, late on the 11th, damage to the plant's electrical system makes it all but impossible to connect them. So they must improvise, hoping to jury-rig their dead instruments back to life by raiding the parking lots, grabbing as many batteries as they can from buses and cars.
It took several hours to figure out how to connect the batteries. They had the schematic wiring diagram, and they were furiously examining it for several hours. We ended up wasting a lot of time.
Meanwhile, the water is boiling away fast in Unit 1. But how fast? 6 hours after the tsunami at 9:19 p.m., they finally get the batteries and some portable generators rigged so the instruments can flicker on. The gauges show the water level in Reactor 1, normally 20 feet above the top of the uranium fuel, is now only 8 inches above it. They pencil in a running record of the water levels right beside the gauge. But the pressure in the vessel is so high it causes inaccurate instrument readings. They learn later the uranium fuel had actually been exposed for 3 hours.
It's becoming more like a lava flow from a volcano. So it overheated, melted, released the radioactive contents, and started falling into the bottom of the reactor vessel.
In Tokyo, Japan's Prime Minister, Naoto Kan, worries that he might have to order a mass evacuation from Fukushima all the way to Tokyo. 50 million people.
If Tokyo needed to be evacuated, I feared the entire nation of Japan would be paralyzed by chaos for quite a long time.
At 9:23 p.m., he orders everyone living within 2 miles of Daiichi to evacuate immediately so TEPCO can prepare to vent some steam. Radioactive steam. At this stage, radioactive iodine-131 is the isotope of greatest concern. It is linked to thyroid cancer. Children are most vulnerable.
We knew we had to vent, but the question was how. There was no electricity, and the valve was pneumatic. We needed an air compressor to open it, but we didn't even have that.
Kan becomes increasingly frustrated and impatient.
Even though we approved it, many hours went by and they still had not vented. We asked them why. A specialist from TEPCO told me, I don't know the reason.
Much of the information he was getting from his government and the utility turned out not to be true. And he had no source of independent knowledge of what was going on in those reactors.
Kan decides the only way to know for sure is to go there. And so early on the morning of March 12th, he flies to Fukushima Daiichi. he passes over mile upon mile of utter devastation from the earthquake and tsunami. Nearly 16,000 are dead. He lands at Daiichi just after 7, about 15 hours after the tsunami.
I met with Superintendent Yoshida for 45 minutes. While he explained the situation on site, I could see that he was a person who could be trusted.
The Prime Minister endorses the superintendent and his plan. Yoshida vows to begin venting at 9 a.m. But there is much to do and much to consider.
To go into a pitch-black reactor building with the containment vessel pressure so high, I don't know if I should say it, but it felt like we were putting together a suicide squad.
To open the vent, they need to manually turn 2 valves, one in the basement and another on the 2nd floor. At 9:04 a.m., a pair of workers makes their way through a dark labyrinth to the 2nd floor of the Reactor 1 building. It takes them 11 minutes to open the valve. 9 minutes later, a second team heads for the valve in the basement.
They get to a point about midway and their radiation is higher than they thought they'd get. They basically had drawn a, if radiation gets to this point, we'll go back. Well, they got to that point before they got to the valves.
They abort their mission. In the Emergency Response Center, they realize they must find a way to open the vent remotely. They scramble to find an air compressor that can be attached to the pipe that blasts the valve open. Finally, at 2:50 p.m., steam starts rising from the exhaust tower, and the pressure starts dropping. Could the worst be over? Actually, it is just about to begin. At Daini, where the power is still out and the reactors are getting hotter, there is a stroke of luck. There is power inside the radiation waste building behind Reactor 1. But they need it down by the water. Naohiro Masuda decides to lay cables, hoping to restore cooling to the reactors. Each of the 4 reactors needs 3 operative pump motors. They need to lay 5.5 miles of cable to connect them all. He needs supplies urgently, at least 50 big spools of heavy-duty cable. Masuda orders the cable, but the shipment is delayed.
The police were busy redirecting traffic for evacuations. And when the truck hit those detours, it wound up going in the completely wrong direction.
While they wait at Daini, the crisis is getting much worse at Daiichi. Uranium fuel rods are encased in zirconium.
If it gets too warm, there's a chemical reaction between the zirconium and the water or steam to produce large amounts of hydrogen.
The containment structure on a boiling water reactor is sealed with a dome-shaped top that is removed for refueling. The pressure in Reactor 1 is now so high that it slightly lifts the top. The hydrogen escapes through the gap and into the reactor building, where it mixes with air. It would be just a matter of time before the highly flammable gas would explode. It is 3:36 p.m.
Suddenly, there was an upward thrust, an impact that seemed to push the whole building upward, and it became completely dark.
I thought it was just another aftershock, but we all sensed something was very wrong.
Then headquarters told me that the top of the reactor building was completely destroyed. When I heard that, I was shocked.
It is a devastating setback.
I think that most of us who were working at the time didn't feel like we were going to make it out alive.
At Daini, workers are preparing to lay the heavy cables when they get word of the explosion at Daiichi.
After the explosion, I had everyone outside come back into the emergency response room. There were 500 to 600 people in the room. I said, please trust me. I definitely won't do anything to harm you. But Fukushima Daini is still in trouble, and I need you to do your best.
The cables arrive on the morning of the 13th. Finally, the heavy lifting to save Fukushima Daini begins.
These were large capacity motors, several hundred amperes. So the cables were fairly thick. Each person had to walk while carrying around 35 pounds of cable.
It is a race against time and physics.
普通そのぐらいのケーブルを引こうと思うと
Normally, if you wanted to lay that much cable, it would take you about a month.
1ヶ月ぐらいかかる。あんな時間で引くことは
I didn't actually think it was possible in the amount of time that we had.
なんか確かに思いましたね。
A total of around 200 workers were involved. We swapped people out when they got exhausted.
In the midst of this, Masuda is running out of fresh water to cool his crippled reactors. He asked TEPCO headquarters for a shipment.
I asked Tokyo for 4,000 tons of water. But instead, they delivered 4,000 liters of bottled drinking water. That made me realize that we were on our own. We couldn't count on Tokyo. So we started looking for water.
He remembers a creek used as a water supply during construction of the plant. Workers repair the leaky old pipe with a scavenged bicycle tube. At Daiichi, events are still overtaking them. As the dust settles at Unit 1, they learn 5 workers are injured. With freshwater reservoirs exhausted, they scramble to inject seawater into the reactors. By 7:04 p.m., success. But using corrosive seawater means the reactors will surely be destroyed. TEPCO headquarters tells Superintendent Yoshida to stop while they seek government approval.
Yoshida does this very dramatic thing where on the video conference, he orders the people to stop the seawater injection. Before that, he called them over and said, I'm going to order you to stop the seawater injection. Ignore that. That's just for Tokyo. You continue seawater injections.
Personally, I think that the decision that Superintendent Yoshida made was the right one.
If we had stopped the seawater injection at that point, I think things would have been much worse.
In the meantime, Unit 3 was becoming unstable. Now our mission was, don't let Unit 3 turn into Unit 1.
With no battery power, they are unable to open the valves to begin venting Unit 3, and there are no handles on these valves. So they grab car batteries, hoping to open them from the control room. By 9 a.m. Sunday, March 13th, the Unit 3 reactor core is exposed and melting. The pressure keeps rising. Fearing another hydrogen explosion, Yoshida orders workers to retreat to the Emergency Response Center early on the morning of March 14th. But the pressure plateaus, and he lifts the order an hour later.
We alternated between deploying and pulling back workers because we were afraid of another hydrogen explosion. Unfortunately, we had close to 50 people positioned around Unit 3 when the explosion happened.
It is 11:01, March 14th.
Since there were so many people out there, I was really afraid for their safety. I thought to myself, it's very possible someone was killed. Then, one by one, people started to trickle back. They were all very pale in the face, and some were bleeding.
When Unit 3 explodes, 11 workers are injured. Amazingly, no one is killed.
And when we finally accounted for everyone, that's when we noticed the water level in Unit 2 was dropping.
It seems inevitable that Unit 2 will be the next to blow. At noon on March 14th, an hour after the explosion at Unit 3, the water covering the hot radioactive fuel begins to drop precipitously. An hour and a half later, the emergency backup cooling system fails. Superintendent Yoshida quietly tells a few trusted workers to prepare buses for an evacuation. For now, he has no choice but to order his men back into harm's way.
After the explosion of Unit 3, he begged us to again go to the field to save Unit 2. It was very impressive.
But by 6:22 p.m., the water is gone. The uranium fuel is completely uncovered and melting. Again, they try to use car batteries to open the vents and relieve some pressure. No luck.
From the 14th until early in the morning on the 15th, it was really... How can I describe it? It was like being in hell.
As day breaks on the morning of March 15th, they hear a loud explosion. But it is not what they dread. It is a complete surprise. There has been an explosion in Unit 4, but this reactor was shut down for maintenance when the tsunami hit. What could have happened there? And what saved Unit 2 from blowing up? The investigation will have to wait. Superintendent Yoshida orders an immediate evacuation of 650 workers. He and nearly 70 supervisors would stay. In the confusion, they become known as the Fukushima 50.
We were fighting an invisible enemy, out-of-control reactors. It was like fighting a war.
It is midnight on the 13th. In the dining control room, operators are girding for what seems inevitable, venting radioactive steam into the environment. Then the cables and the motors finally start falling into place, and the mood shifts dramatically.
When we got word that they were finished running the cable, there was applause. Then they tested the motors and reported the motors are working. And there was more applause. When the pumps were finally working for Units 1, 2, and 4, there were 3 bursts of applause, one for each.
It was such a rush. I can't believe they did it. What a team they are. They pulled off something incredible. I thought, they did it.
The pressure in Unit 1 had risen to just under the containment vessel's pressure limit. We had about 2 hours to spare. I'd say we made it by the skin of our teeth.
At Daiichi, Superintendent Yoshida has now lifted the evacuation order, and workers that had fled start to return.
Things had bottomed out, and for the first time, we were able to catch our breath. Then we started to worry about cooling the fuel pools.
The pools are high up in the reactor buildings, there to store both spent and new uranium fuel. There are more than 3,100 fuel bundles, millions of uranium pellets in the pools for Units 1 through 4. They are not inside the containment vessels, and there are no emergency pumps to keep them full. Should the pools go dry, the rods could overheat and catch fire in the open air, releasing a huge amount of radiation. This is the worst-case scenario that has haunted Prime Minister Khan. It could force him to order a mandatory evacuation of everyone for 150 miles or more. Tokyo, uninhabitable. Maybe for decades. It is hard to fathom. Nuclear plant operator Chuck Casto, then an NRC executive, arrives at Fukushima Daiichi in the midst of this turmoil and uncertainty.
The biggest challenge right away, as soon as I stepped foot on the ground, was should people take lethal doses to stop this accident? The situation was desperate. Concerns we had never faced before.
You can see the steam coming up in Unit 3. That's the worst explosion that they had.
And we were trying to work our way through them the best we could.
It is time for desperate measures. On the morning of March 17th, Self-Defense Forces helicopters fly 4 daring missions, hoping to dump seawater onto the Unit 3 spent fuel pool, which appears to be boiling away. Radiation forces them to fly high above the plant, too high.
In reality, barely any of the water got into the pool, and tensions were still running high.
So they turned to an elite rescue squad from the Tokyo Fire Department. They plan to use equipment designed to fight high-rise fires. They arrive at the plant late the next night. They are led by Deputy Chief Yukio Takeyama, a 35-year veteran.
The plan was to get water into Unit 3 by any means necessary. It needed to be dead on, not like when you put out a fire and spray the water anywhere you want. Two thoughts kept running through my mind. Please be over soon. And what will I do if this place explodes? I had never felt that kind of fear before. I thought, this is what it feels like to really be in trouble.
They get the job done in 20 minutes. Day breaks. The water is now flowing. The fuel in storage is never exposed to the air, and the feared radiation is not released. Tokyo is saved.
Little by little, in a small way, we started to have some hope. Up until then, we were spiraling further down, and now we were dangling there. We weren't falling anymore.
For the first time in days, Takayuki Inagaki finds the time and a working phone to call home.
My wife asked me, "Are you okay?" I could tell she was very emotional from her voice. I said, "I'm alive for now, and I have all my limbs. Please take care."
In the days and weeks ahead, the nightmare does not end, but at least it gets no worse. Concrete pump trucks unleash steady torrents of seawater onto the fuel pools. Power is fully restored to the plant, finally, on March 21st. By June, they install a complex filtration system to remove cesium from the water washing through the radioactive debris and flowing into the Pacific. And slowly, the answers start trickling in. Why did Unit 4 explode? It used the same vent stack as Unit 3. When hydrogen built up there, it seeped into Unit 4 via a shared duct. Why didn't Unit 2 blow up as they feared? They realized the explosion at Unit 1 knocked out a door near the top of the Unit 2 reactor building. It allowed hydrogen and radiation to escape Unit 2. While it was venting, the wind shifted toward land, sending the highest concentrations of cesium to the northwest. The fallout will linger for decades. 8 months after the earthquake and tsunami, reporters tour Fukushima Daiichi. Superintendent Masao Yoshida tries to downplay the worry.
The plant is stable enough for local residents to have peace of mind. However, it's still very difficult to work under the current conditions.
Yoshida had been reprimanded by his TEPCO superiors for disobeying orders and injecting seawater during the worst of the crisis. What about his workers? 6 that ventured into the reactor buildings trying to open the vent valves got the worst doses, as much as 678 millisieverts of radiation. 5,000 millisieverts is considered lethal, and 250 is the maximum normally allowed for nuclear plant workers in an emergency. The cancer risk for those 6 Daiichi workers is undoubtedly greater in the long run. But during that fateful week, they all believed there was no long run for them.
To be blunt, there were a number of times that I thought I would probably die. We couldn't predict anything. The worst-case scenario for the meltdown was that it would get out of control. I felt that this was possible. And so I thought maybe this is the end.
1 month later, the hot, melted cores finally dropped below the boiling point of water. Cold shutdown. By then, Yoshida is gone. He has cancer unrelated to his job. He dies in July of 2013.
Yeah, he was always keeping his head. So always encouraging people.
He was a good leader. You might even say he was superhuman. Not just because of the quality of his decisions, but how quickly he made them.
Without him, I could not have, I could not be here.
Fukushima, 4 years later. What was once one of the largest nuclear power plants in the world is now the center of the most complex, expensive, expansive cleanup ever attempted. It could take as long as 40 years. It will rely on technology not yet invented and the determination of people not yet born. The man in charge of it all is the hero of Fukushima Daini. Naohiro Masuda is now TEPCO's chief decommissioning officer. It is a very different challenge than what he faced in March 2011.
This is the first time anyone has attempted this kind of decommissioning. No one in the world has this experience. So when we try to set a goal to work towards, I can't even give clear instructions because we're still figuring out what it is we're trying to do.
This is not Chernobyl, hastily abandoned, encased in a tomb, and encircled by a fence. This is Japan, where land is precious, and they have a history of rising from ruin. Here they hope to erase the painful past and maybe one day return to their homes.
I was born and raised in this area, the same area where we are decommissioning. It's not possible to live here now, but we all have a strong desire to make it habitable again. I think that's what keeps us working.
It is a disaster with deep roots at high levels. Bad design decisions, technological hubris, a broken safety culture. But in Japan, the sins of the company are the sins of its workers, so they are considered culprits as well as victims.
We did what we had to do. I strongly regret the inexcusable situation that unfolded.
Mankind has never faced the forces of physics and the forces of nature that those people faced. The system may have failed, but those operators did the best they could with what they had. In my mind, they were absolute heroes.
There's nothing to be proud of. Most of the plant workers were born and raised here. They wanted to protect their hometown, protect their families. The reality is, tens of thousands of people are still under evacuation. And we're the ones that caused that. By no means are we heroes.
This NOVA program is available on DVD. To order, visit shoppbs.org or call 1-800-PLAY-PBS. NOVA is also available for download on iTunes.